there are films that feel less like stories and more like warnings buried under sand. Resident Evil Extinction is one of those movies. It does not open the box gently. It drags you into a world where civilization has already lost, where the sun feels hostile, where the roads are empty, and where survival is no longer heroic. It is exhausting. It is dusty. It is strange. And even when the film is messy, even when it does not always reach the emotional height it is aiming for, there is something about its ruined world that refuses to leave your head. Welcome back to the Film Box. Today we are opening a Resident Evil Extinction, the 2007 chapter that takes the Resident Evil film series out of underground labs and city streets and throws it into a scorched apocalypse. This is not the keen horror of the first film. This is not the chaotic urban outbreak of the second film. This is a world after the disaster has already spread too far. The infection is no longer an event. It is the weather. It is the landscape. It is the silence between one dangerous stop and the next. And that is what makes this movie interesting, even when it is not perfect. Because Resident Evil Extinction is a film caught between two identities. Part of it wants to be a post-apocalyptic road movie. Part of it wants to be a superhero-style action chapter for Alice. Part of it wants to carry the horror DNA of the games. And part of it wants to expand the Umbrella Corporation into something bigger, colder, and more disturbing than just another evil company hiding behind glass doors. That mixture can be uneven. But it also gives the film a very specific flavor. You can feel the franchise changing shape here. The first Resident Evil trapped its characters inside a deadly underground machine. Apocalypse opened the doors and showed a city falling apart. Extinction looks at that destruction and asks a darker question. What happens after the world stops pretending it can be saved? That question matters because the film is not just about monsters chasing survivors. On the surface, yes, it has infected creatures, desert convoys, secret experiments, and the return of Alice as a weapon that Umbrella cannot fully control. But underneath that, the movie is about exhaustion. It is about what people become when hope has to be carried like fuel. It is about trying to stay human when the world keeps rewarding you for becoming colder. And Alice sits right at the center of that idea. By this point, she is not just a survivor. She is something else, something altered, something hunted, something powerful enough to frighten the people who created her. But here's where the character becomes more layered than the movie sometimes gets credit for. Alice is not simply powerful because she can fight. She is powerful because she still chooses connection in a world designed to turn everyone into a test subject, a weapon, or a corpse. That is the emotional thread I want to follow today. Not just what happens in Resident Evil Extinction, but what the film is trying to do. Why the desert setting changes the energy of the franchise. Why the convoy matters. Why Umbrella feels more disturbing when it operates beneath a dead world. Why Alice's isolation hits differently here. And why, for all its flaws, this movie still has images, ideas, and moments that make it stand apart from the rest of the series. Because this film has a strange tension inside it. It is not the strongest Resident Evil movie, it is not the cleanest, it is not the most frightening, but it may be one of the most atmospheric. It gives the franchise a sun-bleached nightmare quality, where every horizon looks endless. Every abandoned place feels contaminated by memory, and every choice carries the weight of people who have already lost too much. Picture that for a second, a world where roads still exist, but society does not. Where supermarkets, motels, gas stations, and small towns are no longer signs of normal life. They are traps, leftovers, shells. Humanity has not vanished completely, but it has been pushed into motion. People survive by moving. They live in convoys. They ration supplies. They scan every empty space because emptiness itself has become dangerous. That is the kind of world Extinction wants you to feel. And whether you love this film, dislike it, or sit somewhere in the middle, there is a lot to open here. The production choices, the shift in genre, the evolution of Alice, the return of familiar faces, the new survivors, the umbrella experiments, the action scenes that work, the ideas that could have been stronger. the moments where the film feels ambitious, and the moments where you can almost see a bigger, better version trying to break through the sand. So today we are not just doing a recap, we are opening the film layer by layer. We are looking at the craft, the story, the deeper meaning, the flaws, the legacy, and the ending. We are going beyond the surface of the apocalypse and asking what this movie really adds to the Resident Evil box. Because every film is a box, we open it together. And with Resident Evil Extinction, that box is cracked, buried, overheated, and dangerous to touch. But inside it, there is still something alive. What makes Resident Evil Extinction instantly interesting is not just that the world has ended. Lots of films end the world. Lots of stories show cities destroyed, governments gone, and survivors fighting through ruined places. The surprising thing here is that Extinction does something colder. It begins from the idea that the disaster is already old news. The nightmare is not arriving anymore, it has settled in. That changes everything. In the first Resident Evil, the fear came from being trapped inside a hidden facility where nobody fully understood what had gone wrong. In Apocalypse, the fear came from seeing that hidden disaster explode into the open, swallowing Raccoon City street by street. But Extinction skips past the panic of collapse. It takes us to the after. The part most outbreak stories rush toward but do not always live inside. The part where screaming has turned into silence. The part where survivors are no longer shocked by danger because danger has become ordinary. That is the hook. This is a Resident Evil film where the scariest thing is not always the creature in front of you. Sometimes it is the empty horizon. Sometimes it is the fact that there is nowhere left to run that actually looks safe. Sometimes it is the realization that humanity has not been defeated in one dramatic moment. It has been drained slowly, mile by mile, until all that remains is dust, hunger, distrust, and movement. And then, in the middle of that dead world, there is Alice. But here's what most people miss. Alice is not simply treated like the hero of the story, she is treated like the next stage of the disaster. That is what makes her presence so tense. She is the person you want to see arrive when everything goes wrong, but she is also proof that Umbrella's experiments did not end with the infected. The company did not just create monsters, it created possibilities. It created weapons. It created a human being whose body has become a battlefield between control and freedom. That is why Extinction has such a strange energy around her. Every time Alice appears, the movie feels both safer and more unstable. Safer because she can survive what almost nobody else can. More unstable because the more powerful she becomes, the more the film asks whether power itself can remain human when it is born from something so cruel. And that is the emotional tension hiding inside the action. Alice does not want to be Umbrella's product. She does not want to be a symbol, a weapon, a test result, or a myth whispered by survivors. She wants something simpler: distance, purpose, maybe even a reason to believe that she still belongs with people. But the tragedy is that she keeps being pulled away from ordinary human connection because her very existence puts others in danger. Look closer at this idea because it is where the film becomes more than a desert zombie adventure. The convoy of survivors represents one kind of human future. It is fragile, messy, emotional, and practical. People argue, people mourn, people protect each other. They drive because standing still means death. They are not perfect, but they are still trying to build a small, moving society out of whatever the old world left behind. Umbrella represents the opposite future. It is clean rooms under the earth. It is clean experiments, containment doors, and people speaking about life as if it were later. While everyone else is suffering under the sun, Umbrella is underground trying to control the disaster it helped unleash. And that contrast is powerful. Above ground, humanity is surviving. Below ground, humanity is being processed. Alice is trapped between those two futures. That is why the film works best when it lets her be both a protector and a warning. She can help the convoy, but she cannot fully belong to it. She can fight Umbrella, but she cannot escape the fact that Umbrella shaped her. She is free, but her freedom has a shadow. She is human, but the world keeps asking whether she is something more, something less, or something entirely new. That is a much more interesting question than just can she defeat the monsters? And it gives Extinction its strongest pull. You keep watching because the world feels like it has already lost, and yet the characters are still moving as if tomorrow might exist. You keep watching because Alice is powerful but not peaceful. You keep watching because the desert turns the apocalypse into something almost mythic, like the planet itself is trying to erase what humanity did. You keep watching because Umbrella is not just hiding from consequences, it is studying them, shaping them, and trying to profit from them. That is the real danger, not the infected alone. The danger is a system that looks at the end of the world and still sees an opportunity. So, before we get into the full story, before we open the plot completely, we need to look behind the lens. Because the creative decisions behind Resident Evil Extinction explain why this movie feels so different from the two chapters before it, and why its desert apocalypse became one of the most recognizable images in the entire franchise. Before the story begins, the first thing to understand is that Resident Evil Extinction was not designed to feel like a simple continuation. It was designed as a transformation. The franchise had already gone from claustrophobic sci-fi horror to city-wide outbreak action. So the third film needed a new visual identity. It could not just put Alice in another laboratory, another street battle, or another sealed-off disaster zone. It had to make the infection feel global, permanent, unfixable. That is where director Russell Mulcahy becomes important. Mulcahy came into this film with a background that already leaned toward bold visual style. He was known for work that could be glossy, heightened, and music video sharp, and that matters because Extinction does not try to look realistic in a quiet documentary way. It tries to look like an apocalyptic comic book burned by the sun. The images are exaggerated, the desert is huge, the sky feels cruel, the underground umbrella spaces feel cold and artificial. The movie is not subtle visually, but that is part of its identity. It wants you to feel the contrast between a world rotting above ground and a corporation still pretending it can control everything beneath it. That choice changes how we see the whole film. When Alice stands alone in the open landscape, she does not just look like a survivor, she looks like a myth passing through the ruins of civilization. When the convoy moves across the desert, it does not feel like normal travel. It feels like a tiny human heartbeat moving through a dead body. And when Umbrella monitors everything from below, the clean white spaces do not feel safe, they feel inhuman. The visual style turns the film into a battle between dust and glass, between survival and control. The second production detail that shapes the movie is the decision to move the story into a desert apocalypse. According to production sources, the film used desert locations to create the feeling that the T virus had not only damaged people but also altered the planet's sense of life. Whether the science of that idea is perfect or not, cinematically it gives the movie a strong personality. The world is not just infected, it is dried out, emptied, stripped down to bones. This matters because the setting does a lot of storytelling before anyone explains anything. A city outbreak can still carry memories of normal life. You see buildings, traffic lights, stores, apartments, and you imagine the people who were there yesterday. But the desert gives you something harsher. It removes comfort, it removes shade, it makes every vehicle, every gallon of fuel, every case of supplies feel important. In this kind of world, survival is not dramatic only during an attack. Survival is dramatic all the time. Even silence has pressure. That is why the convoy scenes matter more than they might seem at first. The convoy is not just a cool post apocalyptic image, it is a practical answer to a dead world. Stay still and you become vulnerable. Move too much and you burn resources. Trust the wrong person and the whole group suffers. The desert location forces every character choice to feel like a calculation. It gives the story a survival rhythm. The third important behind the scenes element is Paul W.S. Anderson's continued creative control as writer and producer. Even though he did not direct this chapter, his fingerprints are all over it. By this point, the film series had already moved away from being a direct adaptation of the games and had become its own alternate residual universe centered around Alice. That decision is still one of the biggest reasons fans debate these movies so intensely. Because here's where it gets layered. For game fans, the Resident Evil name comes with expectations. You expect certain characters, certain monsters, certain locations, and a certain kind of survival horror tension. But the films, especially by Extinction, are not trying to recreate the game scene by scene. They are building a separate action horror mythology where Alice becomes the central experiment, the central weapon, and the central emotional engine. That choice gives the movies freedom, but it also creates distance from the source material. You can feel that tension in Extinction. Claire Redfield appears, and for game fans, that name carries weight. But the film's Claire is shaped more as a convoy leader than as a direct recreation of the game character's journey. That is not automatically bad. It gives her a clean function in this story. She represents grounded survival, leadership, and responsibility. But it also shows how the movie series uses game elements almost like raw material, reshaping them around Alice's path. The fourth production piece is the casting and character continuity. Milla Jovovich returns as Alice, and by the third film, she is no longer just playing a person trying to understand what happened to her. She is playing someone who has lived with the consequences. That is a different performance challenge. Alice has to be powerful without feeling emotionally empty. She has to look almost unstoppable in action scenes but still carry loneliness in quieter moments. The movie depends on that balance. Oded Fehr returning as Carlos also matters because he gives the film a human bridge back to Apocalypse. Without him, Extinction could feel almost disconnected from the previous chapter. Carlos reminds you that people who survived before are still carrying the cost of that survival. His presence makes the convoy feel more emotionally connected to the franchise's past, not just a new group of faces in a new wasteland. Ali Larter joining as Claire adds another kind of energy. Claire is not introduced as someone waiting to be saved. She is already leading, already making hard decisions, already protecting people under impossible pressure. That changes the way we read Alice when she enters the group's orbit. Alice may have extraordinary abilities, but Claire has something just as important, the trust of ordinary people. One is a weapon trying to stay human, the other is a leader trying to keep humanity organized. Their contrast gives the film more texture than a simple hero and side character structure. The fifth behind the scenes detail is the film's use of practical creature work alongside digital enhancement. Resident Evil as a franchise has always depended on physical texture. The infected need to feel present. The danger has to feel close enough to touch. In Extinction, the zombie makeup, creature designs, and action staging create a world that feels decayed rather than just digitally destroyed. When the infected appear in crowds, the threat is not only about speed or surprise, it is about numbers. The sense that the old world has become a swarm. That becomes especially important in the more intense action sequences because the movie is at its best when you can feel bodies moving through real space. A convoy under attack works because you understand the geography. Vehicles, windows, ladders, weapons, distance, height. Those details matter. They make the action readable. And when action is readable, tension becomes stronger. You are not just watching noise, you are watching choices. Reportedly, the desert shooting conditions also added a real physical harshness to the production. Heat, dust, and open locations are not just background details when you look at the finished film. They show up in the texture. The actors look like they are in a punishing environment because the film keeps placing them in spaces where comfort is impossible. That helps the atmosphere. You believe these people are tired. You believe the world has worn them down. You believe survival has become a daily negotiation with the landscape itself. And this is why Extinction looks and feels so different from the two films before it. It is not simply changing locations. It is changing the emotional temperature of the franchise. The first film was cold, metallic, and enclosed. The second was chaotic, urban, and explosive. The third is dry, wide, and strangely mournful. It turns Resident Evil into a wasteland story. It asks what remains after the outbreak stops being breaking news and becomes the shape of the world. That is the production choice that defines everything. Because once you understand that the creative thinking behind the desert, the convoy, Alice's evolution, Claire's introduction, Umbrella's underground control, and the film's heightened visual style, the movie becomes easier to read. Not flawless, not always balanced, but definitely more intentional than people sometimes remember. Now the box is ready to open properly. Not with full spoilers yet, but with the basic identity of what this film is, why it exists, and why this strange third chapter still matters inside the Resident Evil franchise. Resident Evil. Extinction was released in 2007, directed by Russell Mulcahy and led once again by Milla Jovovich as Alice. Alongside her, the film brings back Oded Fair as Carlos Oliveira and introduces Ali Larter as Claire Redfield, with Ian Glenn stepping further into the Umbrella side of the story as Dr. Isaacs. On paper, it is an action horror sequel, but in feeling, it is something slightly different. It is a survival western dressed in zombie apocalypse clothing. It is a road movie through a dead world. It is a sci fi monster film about a corporation that keeps experimenting long after morality has disappeared. And that combination is exactly why this movie exists. By the time Extinction arrives, the Resident Evil film series has already burned through two major stages of outbreak storytelling. The first film gave us the secret origin point. The second gave us the city collapsing under the pressure of that secret. So the third film needs escalation, but not just bigger explosions. It needs consequence. It has to show that the disaster did not stop at one city, one lab, or one emergency zone. It became global. It became environmental. It became the new normal. That is the core idea here. Resident Evil Extinction is about what survival looks like after the world has stopped expecting rescue at its heart. This is not just Alice fighting infected creatures again. That is the surface. The deeper story is about people trying to preserve a small piece of humanity when the systems that once protected them have either collapsed or turned against them. The convoy is not just a group moving through the desert, it is a moving community. It is people carrying memory, grief, practical skill, fear, loyalty, and stubborn hope from one ruined stop to another. That matters because the Resident Evil films often move fast. They love action. They love creatures. They love secret labs and corporate betrayal. But Extinction slows the world down just enough to make survival feel heavy. The road is not freedom anymore. The road is necessity. Every mile is a decision. Every stop is a risk. Every stranger could be danger. Every resource becomes emotional because it is tied to whether the group gets another day. Alice enters that world like a ghost from the franchise's past and a warning from its future. She is no longer the confused woman trying to understand who she is. She is no longer simply the fighter trying to escape Raccoon City. Here, Alice is fully aware that she is different. She understands that Umbrella wants her. She understands that being near people can put them in danger. So she stays alone not because she does not care, but because she cares enough to keep distance. That gives the film its emotional loneliness. And this is where Extinction becomes more interesting than a simple sequel checklist. The movie is asking whether a person can still belong to humanity after being reshaped by something inhuman. Alice has been altered by corporate science, but the film keeps testing her through human choices. Does she protect strangers? Does she risk connection? Does she keep moving alone, or does she step back into a community that might need her? Those are the questions that make her more than an action figure in a long coat. The inspiration is clearly built from several cinematic traditions at once. You can feel the zombie apocalypse legacy. You can feel the science fiction experiment story. You can feel the post apocalyptic road film, especially in the convoy imagery, the desert survival, and the idea that civilization has become a memory people carry in vehicles. And of course, the film is still using the Resident Evil universe as its backbone umbrella, the T virus, infected creatures, biological experimentation, and the constant fear that the real monster may not be the infected at all, but the people who keep trying to control them. So here is the spoiler-free verdict first. Resident Evil Extinction is not a perfect film. It has character threads that could have gone deeper. It has story ideas that are bigger than the runtime allows. It sometimes chooses momentum over emotional breathing room. But as a third chapter, it has a bold identity. It gives the franchise a new texture. It takes the series out of familiar horror spaces and gives it a harsh, sun-blasted personality that makes it memorable. This film is for you if you enjoy action horror with a strong visual mood, post-apocalyptic survival, powerful central heroes, corporate sci-fi villains, and a world that feels bigger than one single outbreak. It is also for you if you like sequels that try to change the atmosphere instead of repeating the exact same formula. But if you are looking for pure survival horror, slow dread, puzzle box tension, or a faithful game style adaptation, this one may not fully satisfy you. Extinction is not trying to be quiet horror. It is trying to be a dusty, violent, mythic chapter in Alice's evolution. And once you accept that, the film becomes easier to meet on its own terms. Because the real question is not whether Extinction copies the games perfectly, it does not. The real question is whether it opens a new side of the cinematic universe. And the answer is yes. It opens the wasteland. It opens Alice's isolation. It opens Umbrella's obsession. And it opens a version of Resident Evil where the apocalypse is no longer coming. It is already here. The first watch feeling of Resident Evil Extinction is strange in the best way because the film does not feel like it is trying to welcome you back into a familiar franchise. It feels like you woke up too late. The emergency already happened. The news reports are gone, the soldiers are gone, the cities are gone, the old rules are gone. And the movie gives you this quiet, uncomfortable sense that the world did not end with one giant explosion. It ended in stages until nobody was left to announce the final stage. That opening energy matters because when a sequel begins, you usually expect a direct continuation. You expect the film to pick up the same rhythm, the same visual language, the same emotional temperature. But Extinction immediately feels drier, lonelier, and more haunted. There is a sense of déjà vu at the start, but it is not comforting. It feels like the movie is playing with memory, with repetition, with the idea that Alice's life has become something Umbrella can rebuild, reset, and study again and again. That is a disturbing way to re enter the story. Not because it is loud, because it is clinical. The film starts by making you feel that Alice is no longer simply being chased. She is being understood, measured, copied, and tested by people who do not see her as a person anymore. That is a much colder kind of danger than a creature jumping out of the dark. A monster wants to destroy you. Umbrella wants to define you, and there is something deeply unsettling about that. I walked in expecting another action-heavy Resident Evil sequel, but the film gave me a desert nightmare about identity, control, and survival after hope has become a limited resource. That shift hooked me. The opening stretch has this odd tension between the familiar and the unfamiliar. You recognize pieces of the franchise, the corporate secrecy, the artificial spaces, the experiments, the infected threat, Alice herself. But then the film pulls the camera outward and shows that the world around all of that has changed completely. It is not just one facility anymore. It is not just one city. It is a planet that feels abandoned by its own future. And the atmosphere is the thing that hits first. Resident Evil Extinction feels hot. Not just visually, but emotionally. The sunlight does not feel warm, it feels punishing. The desert does not feel open, it feels empty in a way that traps people. The white spaces make the characters look smaller, not fear. That is one of the clever contradictions of the film. It gives us a bigger world than the first two movies, but somehow that bigger world feels more hopeless. In The Hive, fear came from being locked in. In Raccoon City, fear came from being surrounded. Here, fear comes from realizing there may be nothing left. That is a different kind of dread. The first 10 minutes become hard to look away from because the movie keeps suggesting that the apocalypse has evolved past panic. People are not reacting like this is new. They are reacting like this is life now. That instantly changes the emotional rhythm. You are not watching characters discover the rules of the nightmare. You are watching characters who already know the rules and still might not survive them, and that gives the film a worn down quality that I actually appreciate. The vehicles look like they have been forced into becoming homes. Supplies feel like treasure. Trust feels expensive. Even the quiet moments have a nervous edge because the world is too empty to be peaceful. Every abandoned location feels like it is holding its breath. Every stretch of road feels like it could turn against you. Extinction understands that in an apocalypse, danger does not need to constantly appear on screen. Sometimes the possibility of danger is enough to poison the air. Alice's introduction into that atmosphere also feels different from before. She is not presented as someone stepping into chaos for the first time. She feels like someone who has already accepted loneliness as a survival method. That is what stood out to me. Her strength is obvious, but the film surrounds that strength with isolation. She can handle herself, she can fight, she can move through danger. But she also looks like someone who has paid for every bit of power with distance from other people. That makes the character feel more tragic than triumphant. And this is where the first watch becomes emotionally interesting. You are excited to see Alice be powerful because the franchise has trained you to enjoy that. But at the same time, the movie makes her power feel costly. She is not simply becoming stronger, she is becoming harder to place inside normal human life. In a world where people survive by forming groups, Alice survives by staying apart. That contrast gives her every scene a quiet sadness. Then the convoy enters the film's emotional bloodstream. The convoy gives the story warmth, not softness but warmth. It reminds you that survival is not only about weapons and speed, it is about people agreeing day after day not to abandon one another. It is about building routine inside disaster. It is about creating rules when civilization no longer provides them. Claire's group feels important because it gives the film something Alice alone cannot provide: community. That is why the first watch has such a strong pull. You can feel two survival philosophies moving toward each other. Alice survives through isolation, the convoy survives through connection, Umbrella survives through control. And the film places all three inside one ruined world, then lets the tension build. Look closer at that structure because it is simple but effective. Isolation, connection, control. Those are the three forces shaping the movie. And once you notice them, the opening act becomes more than setup. It becomes a map of the film's entire emotional world. Alice is searching for a way to exist without destroying the people around her. Claire is trying to keep people alive without losing her humanity. Umbrella is trying to solve the apocalypse without ever admitting that its own mindset created it. That is what hooked me in those early minutes. Not just the infected, not just the action, not just the franchise mythology. The feeling that the world is finished but the characters are not. The feeling that survival has become a road with no destination. The feeling that Alice, for all her power, may be the loneliest person in the wasteland. And the feeling that beneath the dust and spectacle, this movie is asking a sharp little question. When the world takes everything from you, what part of yourself do you fight hardest to keep? The filmmaking language of Resident Evil Extinction is built around contrast. Almost everything the movie does visually depends on putting two worlds against each other: the burned out surface and the sterile underground, the moving convoy and the fixed laboratory, the human body in dust and the corporate machine behind glass. That contrast gives the film its strongest cinematic identity. The camera treats the desert like a character, not just a background, a character. Wide shots stretch the landscape until the survivors feel almost swallowed by it. The frame often gives you more empty space than comfort. That matters because the emptiness is the point. In a normal adventure film, a wide open landscape can feel like freedom. Here it feels like exposure. There is nowhere to hide. There is no city wall, no police station, no safe room, no familiar corner of civilization where the characters can pretend things are normal. The camera keeps reminding you that the world has become too big and too empty at the same time. That is a smart visual decision because horror usually works by closing space down. Tight hallways, locked doors, dark rooms, corners you cannot see around. Extinction flips that. It makes open space frightening. It turns daylight into pressure. It turns distance into danger. You are not scared because something is hidden in the dark. You are tense because the daylight shows you exactly how alone everyone is. The color palette pushes that feeling even further. The surface world is dominated by dry yellows, dusty browns, faded oranges, and bleached out light. Everything looks drained. Even when the image is bright, it does not feel alive. It feels overexposed by disaster. The world has color, but not freshness. It is like the planet has been left too long under a cruel sun. Then the film cuts underground and the whole texture changes. Umbrella spaces are colder, smoother, and more controlled. The lighting is artificial. The walls feel sealed. The surfaces are cleaner. But the clean look does not make those spaces comforting. It makes them morally colder. Above ground, people are dirty because they are surviving. Below ground, people are clean because they are separated from consequence. That visual contrast says more about Umbrella than any speech could. They have created a world of ruin, then hidden themselves in rooms designed to look untouched by it. Look closer at the lighting and you can see how the film divides humanity. Survivors live in harsh light. They are exposed, tired, and physically present. Umbrella lives in controlled light. They are protected, filtered, and emotionally distant. Alice moves between those words visually. In the desert, she feels like a wandering myth. In Umbrella's orbit, she feels like a subject of obsession. The lighting keeps changing what her power means. Under the sun, she looks free, but alone. Under artificial control, she looks hunted by the system that made her. The editing rhythm is also important. Extinction moves faster than pure survival horror, but it does not always cut with the frantic confusion of modern action. The stronger sequences allow you to understand position and consequence. You can feel where vehicles are, where threats are coming from, and where characters need to go. That makes the action more engaging because you are tracking decisions, not just impact. Action without geography becomes noise. Here, when the film works, geography gives action meaning. The convoy staging is a good example. Vehicles are not just set dressing, they create levels, barriers, movement, and vulnerability. A bus is shelter until it becomes a trap. A roof is high ground until it becomes exposure. A window is protection until something breaks through it. The production design makes every object feel like it has two identities, useful and dangerous. That is exactly how a survival world should feel. The film's visual texture also depends heavily on decay. Costumes, vehicles, abandoned places, and weapons all look worn down by use. Nothing in the survivor world feels brand new. That is essential because the movie is not about the first day of collapse. It is about life after repeated loss. Clothes carry dust, vehicles carry scars, supplies are packed, reused, repaired, and defended. You feel that people have been living inside emergency mode for a long time. This is where production design becomes storytelling. The convoy is basically a moving civilization made from leftovers. Every vehicle suggests adaptation. Every packed object suggests planning. Every improvised detail suggests a previous moment when someone had to solve a problem quickly or die trying. The film does not need to pause and explain that these people have survived for months or years. You can see it in the way their world is built. The creature world leans into physical presence. The infected are not treated as elegant monsters. They are bodies emptied of identity and turned into hunger. The makeup and movement give them a rough, decayed texture that matches the environment. They feel like part of the same ruined ecosystem as the desert towns and broken buildings. This matters because the infected are not just enemies in the frame, they are evidence. They are what happens when the human body becomes another abandoned place. The sound design helps sell that world too. Extinction uses quiet in a way that makes the desert feel uneasy. Engines, wind, footsteps, distant movement, and sudden bursts of chaos all become part of the survival rhythm. Silence is never completely peaceful. It feels like the world is waiting. And when the action rises, the sound can feel aggressive because the quiet around it has already built tension. Music adds another layer of momentum. The score does not always aim for deep sadness. but it gives the film a hard, driving pulse. That pulse fits Alice's journey. She is moving forward because stopping is not an option. The music often supports that feeling motion, pressure, pursuit, survival. It keeps the film from becoming too still, even when the desert images suggest emptiness. Framing is especially important with Alice. She is often positioned as separate from groups even when she is physically near them. The camera understands her isolation. It gives her heroic images, yes, but those images are rarely purely celebratory. She often looks like someone standing at the edge of human life, close enough to protect it, but not close enough to belong fully inside it. That visual idea is one of the film's strongest, and that is why the techniques matter. The desert photography, the harsh light, the clean underground spaces, the readable action geography, the worn production design, the physical creature texture, and the lonely framing of Alice all serve the same story idea. This is a world divided between people trying to survive honestly and a corporation trying to control disaster from a safe distance. The film may not always be emotionally deep enough to match its best images, but visually, it knows what kind of nightmare it wants to be. A sunlit apocalypse, a moving graveyard, a world where humanity is still breathing, but every breath feels borrowed. The story of Resident Evil Extinction begins with one of the franchise's most unsettling ideas. Alice has become something Umbrella can try to recreate. The film pulls us into a familiar looking space, almost like memory has been rebuilt as a trap. It feels like the past is being staged again, not because anyone wants to honor it, but because Umbrella wants to study it. A version of Alice moves through a controlled test environment facing danger, confusion, and manipulation, while scientists watch from behind the safety of screens. Right away, the movie tells you that this is no longer only about survival, this is about ownership. Umbrella does not just want Alice dead, it wants to understand her, copy her, repeat her, and use whatever makes her different. That is a colder form of villainy because it treats a person like a formula. If the first film made Alice a survivor of corporate cruelty, Extinction shows her becoming the corporation's obsession. She is not only running from the monsters Umbrella created, she is running from the idea that Umbrella believes it created her too. Then the film opens outward and the scale changes completely. The world above ground is ruined, cities have fallen. The infection has spread far beyond the controlled disaster zones of the earlier films. The landscape is dry, empty, and hostile. This is not a temporary emergency anymore. This is the condition of the planet. Roads stretch through dust, buildings stand like bones. Humanity has been pushed into pockets, convoys, and hiding places. And somewhere in that wasteland, Alice travels alone. Her isolation is important because it tells you how much she has changed. She is not simply a wanderer because it looks cool. She keeps distance because she knows Umbrella is searching for her. She knows her powers are growing. She knows the people near her may become targets. So she turns loneliness into protection. That is one of the sadder ideas in the movie. Alice helps people best by not staying with them too long. Meanwhile, another version of survival is moving across the desert. Ted Redfield leads a convoy of survivors, a group that has turned vehicles into shelter, movement into routine, and trust into a daily strategy. Carlos is with them, carrying the weight of everything he has already survived. LJ is there too, trying to keep his personality alive in a world that keeps draining humor out of people. Carmart, Nurse Betty, and the others help create the feeling that this convoy is more than a group of action characters. It is a small community on wheels. That matters because the convoy gives the movie its heart. They are not trying to save the world. That goal is too big now. They are trying to stay alive until the next stop, the next meal, the next patch of fuel, the next possible safe place. That smaller goal actually makes the story feel more human. In a destroyed world, survival becomes intimate. Water matters, food matters, medicine matters, a walking engine matters, a person who knows how to lead matters. Class leadership is practical, not theatrical. She makes decisions under pressure, and you can feel the cost of that. She has to protect people without promising them safety she cannot guarantee. That gives her character a grounded strength. She is not superhuman like Alice, but she is carrying something Alice does not fully have at this point, a community that depends on her. The convoy eventually searches for supplies, and the film uses these moments to show how the old world has become dangerous in a new way. Places that once meant convenience or comfort now feel like traps. An abandoned motel, a gas station, a roadside stop. These are not just locations, they are remains of a life that no longer works. Every door could hide danger. Every shadow could hold something infected. Every supply run forces people to walk through the memory of civilization and accept that memory is now unsafe. Alice crosses paths with this world while still trying to remain separate from it. She finds traces of survivors. She follows information. She discovers signs that there may be a place in Alaska untouched by infection, a possible refuge called Arcadia. That word becomes powerful because in a movie this dry and hopeless, even the idea of a safe place feels almost mythical. It might be real. It might be a rumor. It might be a rumor. It might be one more false promise. But in the apocalypse, hope does not need to be guaranteed to become useful. Sometimes people move because the alternative is giving up completely. Then comes one of the film's most memorable survival threats, the infected crows. This is where extinction expands the infection beyond human bodies in a way that feels visually nasty without needing to be overly graphic. The birds are not just a random attack, they make the T virus feel ecological. The danger is not only walking toward you on two legs anymore, it is in the sky, it is in nature, it is in the world around you. That changes the atmosphere because it suggests that the apocalypse has entered systems people cannot easily control. The convoy is caught in a terrifying situation, and Alice arrives at exactly the moment where her power becomes impossible to ignore. She uses her abilities in a way that feels almost elemental, turning the threat back with a force that shocks the survivors and signals to Umbrella that she is not just stronger, she is evolving. This scene is important because it reveals both sides of Alice's gift. She saves lives, but every major use of power makes her more visible to the people hunting her. That is the trap of being Alice. Helping people exposes her. Hiding protects her, but leaves others vulnerable. The film keeps forcing her into that moral corner, and it is one of the better engines in the story. Underground, Dr. Trund, Isaacs is pushing Umbrella's experiments further. His goal is not simply to survive the apocalypse. He wants to control the infected, to use Alice's blood to create a more manageable version of the nightmare. What makes Isaacs disturbing is that he sees catastrophe as a scientific opportunity. Where normal people see the end of the world, he sees data. Where survivors see people, he sees specimens. He represents the kind of intelligence that has lost its soul. And Umbrella itself becomes a picture of institutional denial. The company helped create the disaster, but instead of truly facing what it has done, it retreats into hidden facilities and continues the same logic that caused the collapse. More tests, more containment, more manipulation, more belief that control is just one experiment away. That is why Umbrella feels so dangerous. It does not learn. It adapts only to continue being itself. When Alice finally reconnects with Carlos and meets Claire's group properly, the story gains emotional momentum. Carlos knows Alice, but he also knows how much has changed. There is history between them, but the world has made ordinary closeness difficult. Alice's presence gives the convoy hope, but it also brings a different kind of risk. The group has to decide whether her strength is worth the danger attached to her. At the same time, Alice has to decide whether she can keep pretending she belongs alone. That is where the film becomes most human. Not in the huge action beats, but in the quiet recognition that nobody survives completely by themselves without losing something. Alice has made isolation her shield, but the convoy reminds her that survival without connection can turn into a different kind of defeat. The group's search for a future leads them toward Las Vegas, but not the glowing city of entertainment and excess that the name suggests. This version of Vegas is swallowed by sand. The image is one of the film's strongest, a symbol of human pleasure, money, spectacle, and artificial brightness buried under the consequences of human arrogance. It is not subtle, but it works. Vegas becomes a grave marker for the old world. The plan is practical. They need fuel. They need resources. They need a way to reach the helicopter that might take survivors toward Alaska. But Umbrella uses the situation to set a trap, and the infected threat escalates. The creatures unleashed here are more aggressive, more coordinated, and more dangerous than the usual infected. This is where Isaacs's experiments come back into the story with consequences. Once again, Umbrella tries to control the nightmare, and once again, the nightmare spills outward. The Las Vegas sequence becomes the film's big collision point. The convoy fights to survive. Alice fights to protect them. Claire tries to keep the group from breaking under pressure. Carlos is pushed toward one of the film's most painful turns. The action here is not just about spectacle, it is about cost. Every decision matters because the group cannot absorb endless losses. These are not soldiers with backup. These are survivors with limited numbers, limited supplies, and limited hope. Carlos becomes central to that cost. After being infected, he understands what is happening to him. The film handles this as a moment of sacrifice rather than shock. Carlos chooses to use what time he has left to help the others move forward. His final act clears a path and gives the survivors a chance. It is one of the movie's strongest emotional beats because it turns an action explosion into an act of loyalty. He cannot save himself, so he saves the group. That choice hits because Carlos has always been one of the more human anchors of the series. He is not a lab created superweapon. He is not a corporate mastermind. He is someone who has survived, cared, fought, and finally chosen meaning over fear. His sacrifice reminds the film that heroism in this world is not only about extraordinary powers. Sometimes it is about making the last choice count. After that, the survivors continue toward the helicopter and the possibility of Alaska. Claire takes responsibility for leading them onward, while Alice turns toward Umbrella. That split matters. Claire carries the human future forward. Alice goes down into the system that helped destroy it. One path is escape, the other is confrontation. Inside the facility, Alice discovers the full horror of Umbrella's obsession, clones of herself, failed tests, repeated experiments, human life treated as disposable material. This is where the story brings her identity crisis into physical form. Alice is forced to look at versions of herself that Umbrella made and destroyed in pursuit of control. It is not just a plot reveal, it is an emotional violation. The company did not only hunt her, it multiplied her suffering. Dr. Isaacs, after being infected and trying to save himself through reckless science, becomes a monstrous extension of everything he believed. That transformation is fitting. He spent the film treating biology like something he could dominate, and in the end, biology turns him into evidence of his own arrogance. Alice confronts him not only as an enemy, but as a symbol of the system that has tried to define her. The final movement of the story brings Alice face to face with Umbrella's deeper structure. She no longer feels like a runaway experiment. She becomes a direct threat to the people who believed they could control her from a distance. And when she discovers the army of Alice clones, the balance of power changes. Umbrella wanted copies. Umbrella wanted weapons. Umbrella wanted control. But now what it created may be coming back for it. The survivors head toward a possible safe future. Alice stays behind to open war on the machine. And the film ends with the sense that the apocalypse is not just a wasteland story anymore. It is becoming an uprising. The product is turning against the manufacturer. The experiment is refusing the lab. The person Umbrella tried to own is preparing to answer with an army of herself. And this is the moment the box opens completely. What Resident Evil Extinction does brilliantly is give the franchise a new atmosphere without completely cutting the thread from what came before. It understands that by the third film, simply placing Alice in another contained outbreak would not be enough. The story needs distance. It needs consequence. It needs the feeling that every mistake Umbrella made has finally spilled past the walls, past the city, past every line that was supposed to hold it back. That is the first thing the film gets right. Scale. The apocalypse in Extinction feels larger than the plot itself. You do not need to see every destroyed country or every ruined capital city to understand the damage. The desert does that work for you. The empty roads do that work. The buried remnants of Las Vegas do that work. The movie gives you a world where collapse has become visual texture, and that helps the story feel bigger even when we are following a relatively small group of survivors. And that scale matters because it changes the emotional weight of survival. In the first film, escape feels possible. In the second, rescue still feels like something people can imagine. But here, rescue has become a rumor. Safety has become a direction, not a place. That gives every decision a heavier feeling. The survivors are not just trying to get through one night, they are trying to justify continuing at all. The second thing that works is Alice herself. Milla Jovovich commands the screen because she understands the specific balance this version of Alice needs. She cannot play her as purely vulnerable anymore because Alice has moved far beyond that. But she also cannot play her as emotionally untouchable because then the character becomes too distant to care about. So she gives Alice a quiet, controlled intensity. The power is there, the danger is there, but underneath it, there is fatigue, there is loneliness, there is the feeling of someone who has survived so much that even victory does not feel clean. One specific scene that proves it is the infected crow sequence. Alice arrives like a force of nature, and on a surface level, yes, it is a big heroic action moment. But the reason it works is not only because she saves the convoy, it works because everyone sees what she can do, and suddenly her isolation makes sense. The scene turns her power into both rescue and exposure. She is amazing in that moment, but she is also less able to hide afterward. That is good character storytelling through spectacle. The film also uses Claire Redfield well as a grounded counterweight. Ali Larter brings a practical toughness to Claire that fits this world. She does not feel like someone performing leadership. She feels like someone who has been forced into leadership because nobody else can carry it better. That makes her valuable. Claire is not there to compete with Alice in power. She represents a different kind of strength, responsibility, organization, and emotional endurance. That contrast is one of the film's smartest choices. Alice protects through extraordinary ability. Claire protects through leadership. Carlos protects through loyalty. Together, those three forms of survival give the film more emotional shape than it would have if everything depended only on action. Carlos is especially important because he gives the movie its most human sacrifice. Odette Fair plays him with warmth, weariness, and a kind of lived in courage. His final decision works because it does not feel like a random heroic gesture thrown in for drama. It feels like a man understanding the situation clearly and choosing to turn his loss into a path forward for others. That scene is memorable because it connects action to emotion. The explosion is not the point, the choice is the point. Story construction is another area where Extinction works better than it often gets credit for. The film has a simple forward motion: survive, find supplies, follow the possibility of refuge, avoid umbrella, and finally confront the source of manipulation. That structure gives the movie a road story engine. The characters are always moving towards something, even if that something might be false hope. This keeps the film from feeling stuck. But inside that moment, the movie bears three levels of conflict. The first is physical survival against the infected and the environment. The second is emotional survival inside the convoy. The third is identity survival for Alice against Umbrella. That layered structure is why the movie feels more interesting than a basic monster sequel. Every major action beat connects to at least one of those conflicts. When the convoy is attacked, it is not just danger, it tests leadership and group trust. When Alice uses her powers, it is not just spectacle. It raises the question of what Umbrella made her into. When Isaacs experiments below ground, it is not just villain behavior. It mirrors the exact mindset that destroyed the world. Direction and visuals are also a major strength. Russell Mulcahy gives the film images you remember. Alice alone in the wasteland, the convoy crawling across the desert, Las Vegas swallowed by sand. Umbrella's clean underground facility hiding beneath a dead world. These images are not complicated, but they are strong. They communicate quickly and they stay in the mind. The Las Vegas reveal is probably the film's most visually iconic idea. It turns a city associated with lights, entertainment, money, and artificial fantasy into a ruin buried by nature and consequence. That image says so much about the movie's worldview. Human excess has been covered over. The spectacle capital has become a desert tomb. Even if the film does not explore that symbolism for very long, the image itself does real thematic work. The action scenes work best when they are clear and physical. The convoy attack has urgency because you understand where people are and what they are trying to protect. The infected are dangerous not because they are complicated but because they push the survivors into panic and limited choices. Extinction remembers that action becomes stronger when the goal is simple and the cost is visible. Music and sound help shape the pressure too. The film's soundscape gives the wasteland a sense of emptiness, then lets sudden attacks break that emptiness sharply. Engines, wind, movement, screams of panic, and bursts of violence all sit against a world that often feels too quiet. That contrast gives the action more punch. The score supports momentum, keeping the film moving even when the story is dealing with exhaustion and decay. But the one scene that remains completely unforgettable is Carlos's sacrifice. That is the moment where the movie's emotional and action identities come together cleanly. It is heroic without being clean. It is sad without stopping the movie completely. It gives a familiar character a meaningful exit. And it reminds you that in this universe, survival is not always about making it to the next chapter. Sometimes survival means making sure someone else can. That is where Extinction is strongest. Not when it tries to be the biggest film in the franchise. Not when it tries to overpower you with mythology. It works best when it lets the apocalypse feel personal, when it shows people carrying grief across empty roads, when it treats Alice's power as a burden, not just a gift, when it lets the desert become more than scenery, and when it understands that the end of the world is not only frightening because of what has been destroyed, it is frightening because of what people still choose to protect. Whereas the Evil Extinction falls short is not in its concept. The concept is strong. A desert apocalypse, Alice as a hunted superhuman, Claire leading a convoy, Umbrella hiding underground, the world above becoming almost biblical in its emptiness. That is a great foundation. The problem is that the film sometimes moves too quickly past the emotional weight of its own ideas. That is the biggest weakness. It has powerful ingredients, but it does not always let them breathe. The convoy is a perfect example. On paper, this group should be the emotional core of the movie. These are the people still trying to live like humans when the world has become a machine for stripping humanity away. They have routines, relationships, fears, jokes, responsibilities, and quiet grief. But the film only gives a few of them enough texture to really stay with you. Claire, Carlos, and LJ stand out more clearly, but several other survivors feel more like functions than full people. That matters because when danger arrives, the impact depends on how deeply we know the people in danger. If we only know them as faces in the convoy, the losses still create tension, but they do not always land emotionally the way they could. The movie wants the convoy to feel like a family on wheels, and sometimes it does. But a few more quiet scenes showing how these people depend on each other would have made the later chaos hit much harder. Claire also deserved more depth. Ali Larter gives her presence, strength, and believable leadership, but the script does not fully open her inner life. We understand what she does. She leads, she protects, she makes hard calls, but we do not get enough of what leadership has cost her. What has she lost? What keeps her going? What does she fear most, beyond the obvious danger around them? The film gives her a strong role in the group, but not enough personal interior space. That is a missed opportunity because Claire could have been the perfect mirror for Alice. Alice is isolated because of power. Claire is burdened because of responsibility. Both are protectors. Both are protectors. Both carry people in different ways. Both understand that leadership can become lonely. The film touches that contrast, but it does not fully explore it. A deeper Alice and Claire dynamic could have given Extinction a stronger emotional spine. The pacing is another issue. The film is efficient, but sometimes too efficient. It moves from setup to threat to action to sacrifice with strong momentum, but it occasionally skips the connective tissue that would make the journey feel more complete. In a post apocalyptic road story, the space between attacks can be just as important as the attacks themselves. That is where you learn who people are. That is where the world becomes lived in. That is where fear turns into atmosphere. Extinction has atmosphere visually, but emotionally, it could have used more silence, not empty silence, human silence, the kind where characters sit with what they have survived, the kind where Alice has to face how much she misses belonging, the kind where Carlos and Alice acknowledge the weight of their shared history without the film rushing them toward the next plot beat. The kind where Claire looks at her group and lets you feel how exhausting it is to be the person everyone watches when things go wrong. Another weakness is the logic of the world. The idea that the T virus has devastated the planet so completely is dramatic, but the film does not always make the mechanics of that collapse feel convincing. The environmental damage, the desertification, the speed and scale of the apocalypse. These are bold ideas, but they are painted in broad strokes. For a fast action horror sequel, that may be acceptable, but because the film leans so heavily on the dead world atmosphere, the world building gaps become more noticeable. You can accept the mood, but if you look too closely, some of the details feel thin. Umbrella's underground operations also raise questions. The company remains visually effective as a villain, but the film sometimes treats Umbrella like an all powerful machine without giving enough attention to its internal collapse. In a world this destroyed, how are resources still being managed? How many facilities remain? How does command truly function? What does survival look like for the people inside Umbrella who are not at the very top? The film gives us the corporate monster, but not always the full ecosystem of that monster. Dr. A. Isaacs works as a symbol of arrogant science, but he can feel more like a franchise villain than a deeply layered character. His obsession with Alice and control is clear, yet the film does not push him into truly surprising territory. He represents a dangerous mindset, and that works thematically, but as a person, he could have been more unsettling if we understood more about his belief system. Not just what he wants, but why he still thinks he is the rational one in a world that proves him wrong every day. The film's connection to the games is another complicated area. For some viewers, the loose adaptation style is part of the fun. It gives the movie their own identity. But for others, Extinction moves even further away from the survival horror roots that made Resident Evil famous. The horror is still there, but the emphasis is much more on action, superhuman evolution, and post apocalyptic spectacle. That shift makes the film more accessible in some ways, but less satisfying if you came looking for tension built through vulnerability and resource scarcity. And finally, Alice's power level creates a story challenge. When a hero becomes extremely capable, the film has to work harder to make danger feel real. Extinction tries to balance this by making her power visible to Umbrella and emotionally costly, which is smart. But there are still moments where Alice feels so far beyond the world around her that the supporting characters risk feeling smaller by comparison. The movie is strongest when her power isolates her. It is weaker when her power simply solves problems. So the flaws are real, underdeveloped characters, rushed emotional beats, thin world building logic, a villain who could have been deeper, a franchise identity that may not satisfy every kind of Resident Evil fan, and a central hero whose strength sometimes makes tension harder to maintain. But here is the fair part. These flaws do not erase the film's personality. They do not destroy its atmosphere. They do not make the movie forgettable. If anything, they revive the Larter version of Extinction that almost exists beneath the surface, a slower, sadder, more character-driven wasteland film that could have been one of the strongest entries in the franchise. What we got is imperfect, but it is not empty, and that distinction matters. To understand Resident Evil Extinction properly, you have to place it beside other apocalypse films. Because this movie is not only competing with Resident Evil expectations, it is also stepping into a much older cinematic tradition, the world after collapse story. The first comparison that immediately comes to mind is Mad Max, especially the idea of survival through movement. In both worlds, vehicles become more than transportation. They become homes, weapons, shelters, and symbols of whether a group can keep going. But where Mad Max often turns the wasteland into a wild social arena full of tribes, fuel wars, and mythic road violence, Extinction keeps the focus narrower. Its convoy is not trying to dominate the wasteland, it is just trying to outlast it. That difference matters. Mad Max is often about what new civilizations rise after the old one dies. Extinction is more about the fragile period before any new civilization has fully formed. Claire's convoy is not a kingdom, it is not an army, it is not a tribe with a clear mythology. It is a temporary family trying to survive long enough to discover whether a better place exists. That makes extinction smaller but also more vulnerable. Then there is Day of the Dead, which is a useful comparison because of the underground research facility idea. In both films, scientists and soldiers are hidden away while the world above has become overrun. But Day of the Dead uses that setup to explore human breakdown, institutional conflict, and the question of whether the infected can be understood or changed. Extinction touches a similar idea through Umbrella and Dr. Isaacs, but it does not go as psychologically deep. It uses the lab more as a villain machine than as a pressure cooker of human failure. That is where Extinction falls short by comparison. It has the ingredients for a sharper study of corporate denial and scientific arrogance, but it keeps moving toward action before the ideas can become truly uncomfortable. Day of the Dead makes the underground feel like a tomb for human ego. Extinction makes it feel like a control center waiting to be destroyed. A third comparison is 28 Days Later, especially in how both films show a world where infection has changed the meaning of normal places. Empty roads, abandoned spaces, and sudden threats become part of the emotional language. But 28 Days Later is more intimate and raw. It makes the apocalypse feel immediate, human, and psychologically exposed. Extinction is more stylized. It is cleaner in its myth making, bigger in its hero imagery, and less interested in realism. That is not automatically a weakness. It just means the films are using similar material for different emotional effects. 28 Days Later wants you to feel the terror of waking into a changed world. Extinction wants you to feel what happens after people have already adjusted to that terror and turned survival into routine. Then there is The Road Warrior, another film where movement, fuel, and survival define the world. But again, Extinction is less interested in social structure and more interested in franchise mythology. The Road Warrior builds its drama around communities, resource conflict, and the legend of a lone wanderer. Extinction has the lone wanderer in Alice, but it also carries Umbrella, the T virus, clones, experiments, and the larger Resident Evil machine. That makes it busier, sometimes richer, sometimes less focused. Compared to the earlier Resident Evil films, Extinction does something bold. It refuses to repeat the architecture of the first movie and refuses to repeat the city chaos of the second. It gives the series a new visual identity, and that deserves credit. The first film esteemed stronger as a contained horror thriller. Apocalypse is more direct as a creature and city action film. But Extinction has the most memorable world texture of the first three. You may forget some plot mechanics, but you remember that desert. If you loved Extinction, the best next watches are films that mix survival, atmosphere, and post-apocalyptic pressure. Mad Max Fury Road gives you the purest version of wasteland movement as cinema. 28 Days Later gives you a more grounded, infected world nightmare. Day of the Dead gives you a darker, more thoughtful underground collapse story, and The Road Warrior gives you the classic desert survival blueprint that still echoes through films like this. If you did not connect with Extinction, then you might prefer the first Resident Evil for a tighter horror setup, or Resident Evil Apocalypse for a more game-like urban action mood. If your problem was Alice becoming too powerful, go toward survival films where the characters feel more vulnerable. If your problem was the loose connection to the games, then this movie will probably never fully win you over, because by this point, the film series has chosen its own road. What Extinction does that many similar films do not is place a superhuman identity story inside a convoy apocalypse. It is not only asking how do people survive after the world ends, it is also asking what happens when the person who can save everyone may no longer know where she belongs. That is its unique space. Not the best wasteland film, not the best zombie film, not the most faithful Resident Evil adaptation, but a strange hybrid with a strong visual memory, a road movie, a corporate nightmare, a clone tragedy, and a desert apocalypse all trapped inside the same box. Resident Evil. Extinction arrived in a very specific movie moment. By 2007, video game adaptations still carried a reputation problem. They could make money, they could beat loyal fan bases, and they could absolutely dominate late night cable energy. But critics often treated them like disposable genre products before they even had a chance to breathe. That matters because Extinction did not arrive in a neutral room. It arrived carrying the weight of two earlier Resident Evil films, the pressure of Capcom's game legacy, and the broader skepticism surrounding game to film storytelling. This was also a period when zombie and infection stories were everywhere in the cultural bloodstream. The early 2000s had already given audiences faster, harsher, more modern outbreak nightmares, and the genre had shifted away from only slow graveyard horror into something more urgent, biological, and apocalyptic. Extinction enters that world by saying we are not just watching the outbreak anymore, we are watching the aftermath. That was its strongest cultural move. It took a familiar franchise and pushed it into the wasteland. The film opened wide in the United States on September 21st, 2007, and financially it did exactly what a studio wants a third chapter to do. It proved the franchise still had commercial fuel. Box Office Mojo lists a domestic opening of about $23.7 million and a worldwide total of about $147.7 million against a reported production budget of about $45 million. That means even with rough critical reception, the movie was not ignored. People showed up. The box office said the audience still wanted Alice Umbrella, infected creatures, and a strange blend of horror, action, and sci-fi spectacle. But here is where the reaction gets interesting. Critics and audiences did not look at the same movie in the same way. Rotten Tomatoes currently shows a low critic score, with the critic consensus basically framing Extinction as more of the same, where a few strong action moments could not fully overcome a plain plot. But the audience score sits noticeably higher, which tells you something important about this franchise. These movies were never built only for critics. They were built for viewers who wanted atmosphere, weapons, creatures, franchise mythology, and Milla Jovovich cutting through impossible odds with full commitment. That divide is important because it explains why the Resident Evil films kept going. A critic might look at Extinction and focus on the thin supporting characters, the loose game adaptation, the logic gaps, and the way Alice's powers pushed the series further away from survival horror. Those criticisms are fair. But a fan might look at the same film and remember the desert, the convoy, the crows, Las Vegas under sand, Carlos the sacrifice, and the clone reveal. One side is judging structure, the other side is responding to iconography. And Extinction has iconography. It may not have the tightest screenplay in the series, but it has images that stick. That is why its reputation has remained more durable than its reviews suggested. Not because everyone suddenly decided it was a masterpiece, no, but because the film has a clear identity. When you say the desert Resident Evil, people know exactly which one you mean. That kind of visual memory matters in franchise filmmaking. Awards-wise, this was never positioned as a prestige movie, and it was never going to be treated like one. Its recognition lived more in genre, fan, and promotional spaces. Metacritic's awards listing shows recognition from the Golden Trailer Awards and the Scream Awards, with wins and nominations in those lanes rather than traditional major award season categories. That fits the movie perfectly. Extinction was not the kind of film that asked for a tuxedo ceremony. It asked for a poster wall, a genre crowd, and someone who wanted to see Alice walk through the end of the world. What did it deserve? Honestly, it deserved more credit for production design and franchise repositioning. The buried Vegas image alone is one of the strongest visual ideas in the live action series. The convoy design gives the movie practical texture. The desert atmosphere makes the apocalypse feel different from the clean laboratory horror of the first film and the urban collapse of the second. If there was an unfair overlook, it was probably the way people dismissed the film as just another sequel without acknowledging how much its setting reshaped the franchise's visual language. Its second wave life is also important. Movies like this often become more familiar after theatrical release through home video, television airings, digital rentals, and franchise marathons. Rotten Tomatoes lists a later streaming release date and current rent or buy availability through Fandango at home, which shows how the film continues to circulate as part of the larger Resident Evil viewing cycle rather than disappearing after 2007. And that is where Extinction feels both timeless and completely of its era. It is of its era because it has that mid 2000s action horror attitude: leather, dust, weapons, industrial music energy, sharp poses, and a heroine framed almost like a comic book icon. You can feel the decade in the editing, the tone, the character styling, and the confidence that genre excess was part of the fun. But it also feels oddly timeless because the central fear has aged well: corporations hiding from the consequences of systems they created, science without humility, the environment turning hostile, people surviving in movement, and a powerful woman being treated as property by institutions that cannot control her anymore. That is the cultural box Extinction arrived inside. Critics saw a flawed sequel, fans saw a memorable wasteland chapter, the franchise saw proof that Alice could keep evolving, and the genre got one of its stranger hybrids: a video game adaptation, a zombie road movie, a corporate apocalypse, and a desert western all moving under the same dead sun. The most interesting fan theories around Resident Evil Extinction usually come from one question the movie quietly plants and never fully lets go: how much of Alice's identity can we trust? That question exists because Extinction turns cloning from a background sci-fi idea into a major piece of the franchise's mythology. Once you see Umbrella creating Alice copies, testing them, discarding them, and trying again, the film changes the way you read everything before it. Suddenly, Alice is not only a person with a mysterious past, she becomes a puzzle, and fan communities have spent years asking whether the Alice we follow is the original Alice, one clone among many, or part of a much larger umbrella design that began before she understood anything about herself. The strongest version of that theory says Alice was never as simple as she seemed. Maybe her memories were shaped. Maybe her role inside Umbrella was planted. Maybe the real Alice was always hidden behind layers of corporate control. Later films pushed this mythology in bigger directions, but Extinction is the movie that makes the theory feel emotionally possible. Why? Because it forces Alice to physically face the idea that her identity can be manufactured. That is not just a twist, that is a nightmare. It means Umbrella is not only attacking her body, it is attacking the meaning of being unique. Does that theory hold up? Partly. It holds up thematically because Extinction is obsessed with copies, control, and ownership. Umbrella sees Alice as a repeatable result, not a soul. The clone reveal supports the idea that the company has been trying to reduce her into something reproduce her. But if you look closely, the film still treats the Alice we follow as emotionally real. Her choices matter, her memories matter, her loyalty to Carlos matters, her reaction to the clones matters. So even if the franchise later complicates what original means, Extinction itself seems less interested in proving Alice is fake and more interested in asking a sharper question. If someone was made by a cruel system, can she still belong to herself? Another theory focuses on Arcadia, the rumored safe place in Alaska. Some fans read Arcadia as too perfect to be trusted from the beginning. In a world this broken, a clean promise of safety sounds suspicious. It feels almost like bait, because the Resident Evil films have trained us to distrust any system that offers security without showing the cost. Extinction uses Arcadia like a mythic word. It is hope, but it is also uncertainty. The friend does not fully confirm what waits there, and that ambiguity is exactly why the theory works. What makes the Arcadia theory interesting is not whether the place is literally safe or not, it is what belief in Arcadia does to the survivors. Claire's group needs direction. They need a reason to keep going. Even if Arcadia is only a rumor, it gives structure to hope that is painfully human. People can survive a long time on food and water, but they also need a future to aim their pain toward. So the theory holds up emotionally even before the franchise answers it more directly. Then there is the theory that Umbrella's artificial intelligence systems know more than they reveal. The White Queen in Extinction is presented as an advanced monitoring intelligence connected to Umbrella's underground operation, and fans have often debated how much these AI systems are protecting humanity, protecting Umbrella, or simply following logic twisted by corporate design. That theory is compelling because it connects Extinction back to the first film. The franchise keeps returning to the idea that machines can make brutal decisions while claiming to preserve life. But the deeper issue is not whether the AI is evil. The deeper issue is who programmed the definition of good. If Umbrella builds the system, Umbrella shapes its priorities. So when an artificial intelligence makes a core decision, the real cost inside the machine may still be corporate power. A more extreme fan theory suggests the entire film series could be understood as layers of simulation, testing, or controlled reality, with Alice's experiences being repeatedly by Umbrella. That theory is harder to prove, and Extinction does not fully support it on a literal level, but you can understand why it exists. The opening test environment, the clones, the repeated scenarios, the surveillance, the laboratory spaces, all of it makes Alice's world feel like something constantly staged by people who want to measure her response. Where that theory falls apart is emotion. If everything is only simulation, the human cost becomes weaker. Carlos's sacrifice matters because it is real inside the story. Claire's convoy matters because those people are truly trying to survive. Alice's horror at seeing the clones matters because she is not just waking from a game. She is facing the consequences of being treated as material. The theory that holds up best is simpler and more painful. Extinction is about a woman discovering that the people who try to control her also try to mass produce her. That is the fan theory box at its strongest, not the wildest explanation, not the most complicated timeline fix. The strongest reading is that Umbrella's greatest mistake was believing that copying Alice would give them ownership of what made her powerful. But Alice's real power is not just in her blood, her abilities, or her survival instinct. It is in her refusal to become what they designed her to be. Beneath the infected, the weapons, the desert, the clones, and the umbrella machinery, Resident Evil Extinction is really about what happens to identity after the world tries to turn people into tools. That is the deeper layer. The film keeps asking a human question through a very heightened sci-fi world. When everything around you is designed to reduce you, what part of yourself do you protect? For Alice, that question is personal. Umbrella does not simply chase her. Umbrella studies her, copies her, tests her, measures her value by usefulness. To them, she is not a woman with memory, pain, loyalty, instinct, and choice. She is a resource, a solution, a biological key, a weapon that has not yet been fully unlocked. And that is why her journey matters. Alice's fight is not only against creatures, it is against definition. Umbrella keeps trying to define what she is, but Alice keeps proving who she is. That difference is everything. What she is can be studied. Who she is has to be chosen. Look closer at the clones because they are the film's most disturbing symbol. They're not just a shocking visual reveal, they are the physical form of corporate dehumanization. Each clone represents a version of Alice stripped of personhood and reduced to outcome. Did these ones survive the test? Did this one produce useful data? Did this one fail? Did this one get discarded? That image hits because it turns exploitation into a room full of bodies. The horror is not only that Umbrella made copies, the horror is that Umbrella believed copying the body meant owning the person, but the film quietly pushes back against that idea. Alice's real identity is not in the surface, it is in her choices, it is in the way she protects the convoy, it is in how she reacts to suffering, it is in how she refuses to become emotionally numb, even after the world gives her every reason to shut down. That is why her loneliness feels so important. Alice is powerful, but power has isolated her. She can survive alone, but the film never presents that as a full victory. Survival without connection becomes another kind of prison. The wasteland outside and the laboratory underground are different kinds of isolation. One is natural and brutal, the other is artificial and controlled. Alice moves between both, trying to find a version of herself that is not owned by either, and this is where the convoy becomes the emotional answer to Umbrella. Umbrella sees life as material. The convoy sees life as responsibility. That contrast is simple, but it gives the movie its moral shape. Claire's group is not perfect. They make mistakes, they argue, they are scared, they lose people. But they are still trying to preserve human meaning. They bury grief inside movement. They turn vehicles into homes. They ration supplies not only because supplies matter, but because the people using them matter. They are not building a perfect future. They are protecting the idea that a future is still worth reaching. That is why Arcadia matters as a symbol. Whether it is safe or not, whether it is real or not, Arcadia represents the human need for somewhere to go. In a ruined world, hope becomes directional. People need a North Star, even if the sky is full of smoke. They need to believe that all this driving, fighting, using, and enduring has a destination beyond just another day of fear. And that is deeply human, because in real life, people survive hard seasons the same way. Not with certainty, with direction, with a reason, with one small belief that tomorrow might contain something today does not. Resident Evil Extinction takes that feeling and makes it literal. The convoy keeps moving because stopping means death, but also because motion itself becomes fate. Every mile says, we are not done yet. Every engine starting again says, the world did not get the final word. Every person who stays with the group says, I have rested but leave someone beside me is worth saving. That is the film's strongest emotional idea. Humanity is not preserved by systems, it is preserved by choices. Umbrella has systems. It has labs, files, protocols, artificial intelligence, weapons, and command structures. But it has almost no humanity left. The survivors have almost nothing, yet they keep making human choices. They protect, they mourn, they sacrifice, they hope, they remember names, they care when caring is dangerous. Carlos's sacrifice becomes powerful inside this deeper reading because he does not defeat the apocalypse. He does something smaller and more meaningful. He turns the end of his own road into a chance for others to continue theirs. That is the opposite of Umbrella's worldview. Umbrella uses people to preserve itself. Carlos gives himself to preserve people. That is why the moment lands. The film also carries a quiet environmental meaning. The dead desert is not just an action setting. It feels like a world responding to human arrogance. Umbrella thought it could contain nature, biology, mutation, and consequence. Instead, consequence escaped. The planet became a mirror of human failure. Dry, emptied, hostile, wounded. The world outside looks like what Umbrella is inside, drained of life. But the film does not end in pure hopelessness. It ends with Alice discovering the clones and turning Umbrella's own logic against it. This is important. Umbrella tried to multiply control. Alice sees the possibility of multiplying resistance. The same image that begins as horror becomes a threat to the people who created it. That is the deeper reversal. The thing made to serve power may become the thing that destroys power. So, what is Resident Evil Extinction really about? It is about identity under attack. It is about community after collapse. It is about hope as movement. It is about the difference between being useful and being human, and maybe most of all, it is about refusing to let the worst thing that happened to you become the final explanation of who you are. Alice was changed by Umbrella, but she is not owned by Umbrella. The world was destroyed by arrogance, but the people still moving through it are not only ruins. And the box at the center of this film is not just filled with infection, experiments, and apocalypse. It is filled with a stubborn human question that survives all of that. After everything tries to turn you into less than a person, can you still choose to be more? The legacy of Resident Evil? Extinction is unusual because the film did not redefine zombie cinema, and it did not suddenly convince everyone that video game adaptations had solved their biggest problems. Its influence is more specific than that. It changed the shape of the Resident Evil film franchise by proving that Alice's story could survive outside the expected spaces. That matters. Before Extinction, the series had a clear pattern of containment breaking down, a hidden facility, Banner City. The danger kept expanding, but it was still tied to places where the outbreak could be imagined as a crisis with borders. Extinction removes that comfort. It says the borders failed. It turns Resident Evil from an outbreak franchise into a full apocalypse franchise. Once that happens, the series can never really go back to being small in the same way. That is the film's biggest franchise impact. It widens the mythology. It makes Umbrella feel less like a company covering up one disaster and more like a global power structure trying to survive its own sins. It changes Alice from a survivor of experiments into the center of a larger war against the people who created her condition. And it introduces the clone idea in a way that becomes essential to where the later films go. You can feel Extinction's fingerprints on the sequels that follow. The franchise becomes bigger, stranger, more artificial, and more focused on Alice as both individual and symbol. After this film, the story is not simply about escaping monsters. It becomes about systems, replicas, simulations, armies, and the question of whether Alice's identity can survive being copied, weaponized, and mythologized. In that sense, Extinction is a bridge. It connects the more grounded action horror of the early films to the more heightened sci fi spectacle of the later ones. It is the point where the franchise fully accepts that it is not trying to be a pure survival horror adaptation anymore. It is building its own mythology. You may love that choice, or you may think it pushes the series too far away from the games, but it is a decisive move. And decisive moves matter in franchise history. Its influence also shows up in how memorable its wasteland identity became. When people talk about the Resident Evil films, Extinction is easy to identify instantly. It is the desert one, the convoy one, the buried Vegas one, the one where Alice becomes even more mythic and Umbrella's obsession with cloning comes into full focus. That kind of instant visual label is valuable. Many sequels blur together, this one does not. Even if someone dislikes the film, they usually remember its world. That is a form of legacy. The film also sits inside a larger wave of 2000 genre cinema that love mixing horror with action, science fiction, and comic book energy. It belongs to an era when studios were still figuring out how to translate game properties for mainstream audiences, often by loosening the source material and building star-driven cinematic universes around familiar brand names. Extinction represents both the strengths and weaknesses of that approach. The strength is freedom. The movie can create a bold new environment, center Alice's evolution, and use the games as inspiration rather than a strict blueprint. The weakness is distance. The further it moves from survival horror, the more some fans feel the Resident Evil name becoming a costume for something else. That tension has followed the film for years. But over time, Extinction has benefited from one thing: personality. It is not a bland sequel. It has flaws, but it has a face. It has heat. It has dust. It has a specific mood. It has an ending that pushes the franchise into a bigger war. And it has one of the clearest examples of Alice being framed not only as an action hero, but as the consequence of Umbrella's arrogance turned against them. its reputation has not transformed into universal acclaim and it probably never will. The criticisms remain fair. The supporting characters could be deeper. The world building could be stronger. The emotional material could breathe more. But the film has aged into a recognizable chapter with a stronger identity than many middle entries in long running franchises. That is why Extinction still matters, not because it perfected Resident Evil, because it expanded what the film version of Resident Evil could be. It took the box out of the lab, out of the city, and into the dead open world. It made the apocalypse feel sunlit instead of shadowed. It turned Alice's survival into a question of identity. And he made Umbrella's greatest mistake painfully clear. The company thought it was creating weapons, but it was creating the thing that would eventually come back to open every locked door. Alright, full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now. Go watch it and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you'll want to experience it fresh. The biggest twist in Resident Evil Extinction is not simply that Alice has powers, or that Umbrella is still operating, or that the world has been swallowed by the T virus. The biggest twist is that Alice is no longer just one woman running from one corporation. She has become a template, a repeatable experiment, a living answer Umbrella keeps trying to copy, test, control, and weaponize. That changes the entire meaning of the opening. At first, the film seems to be bringing us back into familiar territory. A woman wakes up in a controlled environment. She moves through spaces that echo the first film. There is danger, there is confusion, there is the feeling that the past has returned. But then the movie reveals the cruel truth. This is not the Alice we know. This is a clone being tested, pushed, and ultimately discarded when she fails to meet Umbrella's expectations. That reveal matters because it tells us how far Umbrella has fallen morally. They are not just experimenting on infected creatures anymore. They are manufacturing versions of a person and treating failure like waste. The horror is not only biological, it is industrial. Umbrella has turned human identity into a production line. And that is the secret sitting under the whole movie. While Claire's convoy is fighting for food, fuel, medicine, and safety above ground, Umbrella is below ground trying to perfect control. Doctor is. Isaacs believes Alice's blood may help him create a way to tame or manage the infected. On paper, that sounds like science trying to solve a problem. But look closer. Isaacs is not truly trying to heal the world. He's trying to master it. He wants a version of the apocalypse that can be owned. That is why his experiments with the infected are so important. The more aggressive infected used later are not random monsters. They are the result of Umbrella trying to modify the threat instead of learning from the disaster. Every time the corporation touches the virus, it creates another consequence. It does not cure the nightmare, it upgrades it. Alice, meanwhile, is surviving alone because she knows Umbrella can track her. Her powers are growing, especially her psychic abilities, and every time she uses them, she risks giving herself away. This creates one of the film's strongest internal conflicts. Alice has the ability to help people, but helping people makes her visible. She can hide and protect herself, or she can step into danger and protect others. The infected crew attack forces that choice. Claire's convoy is overwhelmed by a threat that feels different from the usual infected. The bursts show that the T virus has moved beyond human bodies and into the ecosystem. The sky itself becomes dangerous. That is a huge escalation because it means the world is not just filled with infected people. The world has become infected as a system. When Alice saves the convoy, she does more than stop an attack. She reveals what she has become. The survivors are stunned because they are not looking at a normal fighter anymore. They are looking at someone who can bend the outcome of a disaster in seconds. But Umbrella notices too. Her act of compassion becomes a signal flare. That is the tragedy of Alice in this film. Her humanity exposes her. The road to Las Vegas becomes the next major turning point. The convoy needs fuel and supplies, and Vegas becomes a symbolic location before it even becomes an action scene. This is a city once built on fantasy, money, lights, and artificial escape. Now it is buried under sand. The image tells you that the old world's brightest illusions could not survive the truth of what humanity created. But the Vegas stop is also a trap. Umbrella uses the situation to draw Alice out, and Isaacs unleashes his enhanced infected. This is where the film's themes become physical. The convoy represents survival through community. Alice represents survival through resistance. Umbrella represents survival through control. In Vegas, all three collide. The attack is chaotic, but the meaning is clear. Every time Umbrella tries to control the infected, ordinary people pay the price. Claire's group loses people because Isaacs wants results. Carlos is beaten because Umbrella's experiments have consequences outside the lab. Alice is forced to fight not only creatures but the system that keeps creating new versions of the same disaster. Carlos's infection is one of the film's most emotional spoilers because it turns a returning hero into a ticking clock. He knows what the bite means. He understands that his time as himself is limited, and that knowledge gives his final decision power. He does not wait to become a danger to the others. He chooses to use his last moments with purpose. His sacrifice clears the way for the survivors and gives the convoy a chance to reach the helicopter. It is not just an action beat, it is a moral contrast. Umbrella spends the whole film using people as material. Carlos chooses to give himself as a gift. That difference is the soul of the movie. One side consumes life to protect power. The other side gives life to protect people. After Carlos's death, the story splits into two futures. Claire takes the remaining survivors toward the possibility of Arcadia. Alice goes into Umbrella's underground facility. This split is important because Claire carries the hope of ordinary human survival, while Alice turns toward the root of the nightmare. Claire's path asks, can people still find a safe place? Alice's path asks, can the system that caused this finally be confronted? Inside the facility, Alice discovers the clone chamber, and this is where the film's deepest horror fully reveals itself. She sees versions of herself, not symbolic versions, actual bodies. Attempts die, failures, replacements. Umbrella has not only been chasing her across the wasteland, it has been trying to reproduce her like technology. This detail changes Alice's relationship with herself. She is no longer only fighting for survival, she is fighting for the meaning of her own identity. If Umbrella can make copies of her body, then what makes Alice? The film's answer is non scientific, it is emotional. Alice is Alice because of choice, because of memory, because of loyalty, because of the way she keeps choosing to protect life even when her own life has been violated by the people who want to own her. Dr. Isaac's transformation into a monster is the film's most obvious poetic punishment. He spends the story trying to dominate mutation, and then mutation dominates him. He treats the virus like something he can shape through intelligence alone, but his arrogance turns him into a creature that proves he never understood the forces he was playing with. He becomes the physical form of his own mistake. The confrontation between Alice and the mutated Isaacs is not just hero versus monster. It is experiment versus experimenter, consequence versus arrogance, person versus system. Isaac sees power as something to possess. Alice sees power as something she must choose how to use. That difference is why she remains human and he does not. The final hidden detail most people miss is how the facility repeats the first film's imagery, but with a darker meaning. In the first movie, the underground world was a trap Alice had to escape. Here, the underground world is a factory of everything done to her. The franchise has come full circle, but the emotional meaning has changed. Alice is not lost inside Umbrella's maze anymore. She is walking into it with purpose. The ending reveals that Umbrella's leaders are still trying to manage the crisis from a distance, still speaking as if control is possible, still believing they can contain the consequences of their own decisions. Then Alice contacts them and makes it clear that she is coming. But she is not coming alone. The army of Alice clones becomes the final reversal. Umbrella created copies because it wanted control. Alice sees those copies as potential resistance. What was designed as a corporate weapon may become a force against the corporation itself. That is why the ending works as a franchise escalation. It turns the clone rebirth from horror into threat. Umbrella's secret is about to become its punishment. There is no post credit scene in the theatrical sense that changes the story after the credits, but the ending itself functions like a giant promise. It tells you the next chapter will not simply be another survival journey, it will be war. Alice has gone from hunted survivor to active challenger. She is no longer only escaping the box, she is preparing to break it open from the inside. My personal reaction to the ending is mixed but fascinated. Emotionally, I wish the film had stayed longer with Alice processing the clones, because that discovery is huge. Imagine seeing your own face turned into a graveyard of experiments. That should shake the character deeply. The movie gives us the shock, but not quite enough silence afterward. Still, as a franchise ending, it is strong. It leaves you with a sharp image, one Alice standing before many Alices, all of them representing Umbrella's arrogance coming back to life. The corporation tried to mass produce power, but it fought that power without obedience becomes rebellion, and that connects perfectly to the deeper meaning of extinction. The ending says you can be shaped by cruelty without belonging to it. You can be made inside a system and still turn against that system. You can carry the scars of what was done to you and still decide what those scars mean. That is Alice's real victory. Not just defeating Isaacs, not just helping class convoy escape, not just surviving another chapter. Her real victory is refusing to let Umbrella define her as a product. The film begins with a fake Alice dying inside a test. It ends with the real Alice discovering an army of copies and turning that nightmare into possibility. That is the full spoiler key. Resident Evil Extinction is not only about the end of the world, it is about the end of Umbrella's illusion of control. The wasteland shows what the corporation destroyed. The convoy shows what humanity is still trying to save. Carlos shows what sacrifice means when hope is fragile. Claire shows leadership without superhuman power. Isaac shows intelligence without humility. And Alice shows that identity is not something a corporation can manufacture, even if it can copy a face. The box opens completely because Alice finally sees the full scale of what was done to her. And once she sees it, she stops running. So, where does Resident Evil Extinction finally land when we close the box and look at everything inside it? For me, this is a 5.5 out of 10. And that rating is important because it does not mean the film is empty. It does not mean it has no value. It means Extinction is a movie with a stronger identity than execution. It has a memorable world, a bold genre shift, a great desert atmosphere, a strong central image of Alice as both survivor and experiment, and a franchise changing ending. But it also has underdeveloped characters, rushed emotional beats, and story ideas that deserve more space than the film gives them. This is one of those sequels where you can feel a bigger movie hiding inside the movie we got. The best version of Resident Evil Extinction would have slowed down just a little. It would have spent more time with Claire's convoy. It would have let Alice and Carlos carry more emotional history between them. It would have explored the psychological horror of the clones more deeply. It would have made Umbrella's underground world feel not only villainous but desperate, decaying, and afraid of the future it created. But even with those missed chances, Extinction has something many forgettable sequels do not have: a mood. You remember this movie because of the sun, because of the sand, because of the convoy, because of Las Vegas buried like a warning, because of Alice walking through a world that has already died and still refusing to become dead inside. That visual memory gives the film staying power even when the screenplay is not as sharp as it could be. You should watch this film if you enjoy action horror with a post-apocalyptic edge. If you like Milla Jovovich's version of Alice, if you are following the full Resident Evil film series and want to understand how the franchise moves from outbreak survival into larger sci-fi mythology, if you enjoy desert wasteland imagery, corporate villain stories, clone experiments, and movies where the hero feels more like a myth than an ordinary person, you might not connect with it if you want Resident Evil to feel like pure survival horror. If you want tight suspense, puzzle-like tension, deeper character writing, or a more faithful relationship with the games, Extinction may frustrate you. It is not built like a slow burn horror film. It is built like a dusty action chapter with horror elements stitched into its bones. So, how should you watch it? This is a streaming watch, not a must own film unless you are a Resident Evil collector or you have nostalgia for this era of action horror. It works best in a franchise marathon, especially after Apocalypse, because you can feel the scale expanding. The jump from city outbreak to global wasteland gives the series a new flavor, and even if that flavor is imperfect, it is distinct. And sometimes distinct matters. Because a perfect film without personality can fade quickly, but an imperfect film with a strong atmosphere can stay in your mind for years. Resident Evil Extinction is exactly that kind of movie. Flawed, uneven, sometimes thin, but never faceless. It opens a harsh new corner of the franchise and leaves Alice standing in the wreckage of everything Umbrella thought it controlled. The company created monsters, viruses, clones, weapons, and systems, but it could not create obedience. It could copy Alice's face, but it could not copy her will. That is the final power of the fin, not destruction. Resistance. The box closes with dust on its lid, fire in the distance, and Alice no longer running from the people who made her. She is turning back toward them. Every film is a box, and we open this one together. And that is our full breakdown of Resident Evil Extinction. If you stayed with me all the way through this wasteland, thank you. This is exactly why I love opening films layer by layer because even a messy sequel can still hold meaning, mood, hidden ideas, and moments that deserve a closer look. Sometimes the most interesting films are not the cleanest ones. Sometimes they are the ones with cracks because the cracks show us what the movie was trying to become. If you enjoyed this breakdown, leave a like, subscribe to the Filmbucks, and join us for the next deep dive. It helps the channel grow, but more than that, it tells me you want more movie breakdowns that go beyond simple recap and actually open the story from the inside. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Resident Evil Extinction is underrated because of its atmosphere and Alice's evolution? Or do you think this is where the franchise moved too far away from true Resident Evil survival horror? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this is one of those films where fans rarely agree completely, and that is what makes the conversation fun. Next time, we are opening another film box, another story, another ending, and another set of details hiding in plain sight. Every film is a box, and we've only just started opening them. That's the film box. See you in the next one.